we'll take a look now at fascism as a general theoretical concept, and then we'll look at two specific case studies, that is Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany, and see how they kind of use these elements of fascism in order to further their own cause, and how they kind of adapt these general techniques into their own country. So fascism in general arises after World War I, and it's a response to a distrust and a dislike of the ideas of liberalism, Marxism, and traditional conservatism. So fascists really look back at World War I and see these kind of main ideas as all having failed. And so they point to the struggles of every nation during the war and after the war, and point to those as being a failure. So they think that they need to find a new kind of way of governing, a new way of looking at the world, and a new way of dealing with the world around them and governance. And so they point to World War I again, showed that liberal democracy had been a failure. And they also point out that the times that governments had success was when there was a single party state and the leader took absolute power. So fascists begin pushing for a single party totalitarian state. And in that way, they argued, their nation could be ready for any wars or economic difficulties that were coming down the pipeline, because as a single party without dissenting voices, they would have a cohesive plan of attack for dealing with those wars or economic issues, versus democracy, where everyone just kind of quibbled with each other and could never reach a conclusion that maintained and held fast. And an example of that fascists would have pointed to would be interwar France, where they may have made progress towards ending depression, but it was immediately turned over by the next government that came in. And just those problems that arise in a democracy. So some of the key tenets of fascism, and there's a lot, and again, not every fascist government has this, but fascists tend to be ultra-nationalists. They're super proud of their nation, and their emphasis on not just nation, but ethnicity. So it tends to have a racial element to their nationalism. They also believe very firmly in totalitarianism, total control from one person, and that naturally leads to a single party state where there are not dissenting voices. They like to rally behind a single leader, and that's what this personality cult is right here. This idea that there is a singular leader, a demagogue who is influential, who is got a lot of charisma and can lead the country. And they rally behind him and really idealize him as almost a god, and put him up on a pedestal. And naturally, this gives rise to dictatorship. Of course, you have single-party totalitarian dictatorship, where whatever they say goes, and that's just the way it's going to be. They're very militaristic. They emphasize the military and the building up of military and strength, and you see this shown through images. And the leaders of fascist nations generally are wearing military uniforms as they're leading. Francisco Franco is general in Spain is Generalissimo Francisco Franco. He's the general. Mussolini and Hitler always are photographed wearing military uniforms. They believe in a mixed economy, which is some government involvement, but it's not socialism, it's not communism, but it's also not free market capitalism. So they believe the government should be involved, but the government should be involved to increase the economy, and they don't really care about the workers. They're not really interested in helping the workers. They're just interested in making money. They push forward this idea of a new man, and this really is a promotion of youth and virility and kind of rebirth of whatever nation they're in new technology, new advances, and youthfulness. They're a big fan of direct action. They don't like indirect action. They like confrontation. And they also push imperialism. And that ties back to this nationalism idea, that they are so great that they should be expanding abroad. And so we see that when Italy tries to make grabs for Ethiopia, and when Hitler grabs into Austria and the Czech Republic. These are imperialistic actions that tie back to nationalism. So that's like fascism is a broad idea, and it's so different from country to country. It's really hard to nail down a singular definition, but it generally combines these tenets, right? You have a single leader who is charismatic, emphasis on the military and on youthfulness, technology, and advancing, an absolute rule by one person. So let's look at Italy real quick. Things in Italy were not great after World War I. Everyone was disappointed with the Treaty of Versailles, specifically the nationalists who believed that they were going to get more territory and get overseas colonies. They were denied those overseas colonies, and they only gained a little bit of territory in their northeast on the border with Austria. So they were really frustrated with this. At the same time, workers are frustrated because their government is not giving them the social and land reform that they had been promised. So you have frustration from multiple levels and from various groups. The Russian Revolution had also inspired socialist and radical communists within Italy, and they kind of banded together with the socialist, communist, and radical workers. So you have a lot of kind of grumbling going on in Italy where there's frustration on all levels from various people. And this is kind of building resentment you see simmering underneath. And it is in this that Benito Mussolini kind of rises to power by playing these groups off against each other and playing up on the fears of others. And that's another big thing you see in fascism, is kind of the creation of fears and an us and them mentality. So Mussolini organizes a group in Milan in 1919 that calls themselves a fascist political party. So he's kind of got this term going, and he's trying to start as a legitimate political party. And a lot of these members had served in World War I, and they had been in the commando units. So they had kind of been on the front lines. They'd seen the death. They were risk takers. They were young. They were ambitious. And what they did is they adopted those uniforms from World War I, and they wore black shirts. And so they named themselves the Black Shirts, right? That was Mussolini's core group of fascists were known as the Black Shirts, having adopted that idea from the commando units of World War I. And they had a motto, which was, "I don't give a damn." And they really lived that motto out, ignoring rules and policies and ignoring kind of the traditional politics of Italy and the traditional social expectations that were laid upon them. And so this movement begins in 1919. As this is going on, you see this turmoil in Italy reaches kind of its tipping point. And socialists seize land from the wealthy landowners. They go on strike, and they're causing general disruption in and throughout all of Italy. And the landed aristocrats and the factory owners and the wealthy were fearful that Italy would become a breeding ground for a communist revolution like what they had seen in Russia. And so they were really afraid of that, and they were seeing that play out in their eyes, right? Their land was being taken from them by these roving bands of socialists. And so these aristocrats and these wealthy people turned to Mussolini and like, look, we need your help. We know you don't like these socialists. You have an anti-socialist, anti-communist bent. Can you help us restore order? You know, you are former military or a political group, kind of pseudo and pseudo-terrorist group. Can you help us out? And Mussolini and his black shirts are like, absolutely. Let's figure this out. And so they attack these socialists. They attack the meetings of socialist political gatherings. They break up strikes by showing up and beating people, killing people. And they attack trade unions. And then they also just run armed patrols around these wealthy landowners' estates to prevent them from being attacked by the socialists. So they become kind of a de facto private army and targeting specifically these socialists that they are afraid will cause a violent revolution. And Mussolini is so effective in putting down these socialist uprisings or strikes that by 1922 the king asks him to become the prime minister. And that's in part because, not just because of his effectiveness, but because he was a threat. The black shirts kind of took the place of the police and the military. So Mussolini becomes prime minister, and as prime minister, he turns Italy into a one-party state, does not allow for other political parties or political action, and uses illegal methods, including murder, to eliminate political rivals. He sometimes just jails them without cause, but in extreme cases, he kills them. And so you see that in a short amount of time, by 1926, so 4 years after he becomes prime minister, he has succeeded in ending political parties, squashing the independent press, and getting rid of trade unions. And this is Mussolini and his followers in their black shirt uniforms. And so this extreme grab for power has led Mussolini to exert total control and have a lot of people behind him. He inspires people, but he also strikes fear in people. And he does that by restoring the death penalty, which Italy had previously abolished, and by strengthening the police force, including a secret police that would destroy dissent. So if you were talking behind someone's back and thinking you're going to get away with it, maybe not so much anymore because of Mussolini's secret police. And then to fix the economy, Mussolini and the fascists adopt something called corporatism. So they replace profit-driven capitalism with this idea of corporatism, and they divide the economy into 22 different corporations. And this is then, each corporation is a committee that has representatives from workers, from the employers, and from the state. So there's a representative from the factory, there's the factory owner, and then there's someone from the government who are there. And they're like, okay, look, here's how are we going to get this all done? How are we going to make sure that we have progress? And by doing this, Mussolini was kind of putting on a front to where workers thought that they actually had a voice, when in reality they don't, but they have this front of being involved in these corporations. And these corporations are designed to allegedly work for the good of the nation. Of course, they end up working for the interests of the owners and the wealthy people, who then give kickback to the government employees. But by doing this, they're able to direct the economy and kind of gear the factory owners and the means of production to what will most benefit the state, all the while ignoring the needs and wants of the workers. So that's kind of their economic policy. Mussolini also is in part of that kind of cult mentality and single demagogue leader. They create something known as the cult of the Duce, and it's literally this cult behind Mussolini of people overemphasizing how great he is and how wonderful he is. And he uses public appearances to give them a chance to give his people, the Italians, a chance to see him in public. And he really believes that he is fascism. He is the state. Without him, Italy does not have fascism, does not have success. And to promote this cult, he orders the press to ignore his birthdays, and does not allow them to photograph him with his grandchildren, so that he doesn't appear old, because he needs to be pushing that idea of the new man and being young. And so, in furthering that, he's depicted as a man of action, and he has the press take pictures of him as he's flying in a plane or riding a train or driving a car, so that it shows that he is active. He's embracing this new technology. He is this new wave, right? He is not the old decrepit leader that new technology has passed. He's embracing it full on and being fully involved in it. And by doing so, he really gains prestige and power. He also uses mass media very effectively. He has all his speeches broadcast on radio in order to spread his message. He sets up massive public rallies to have kind of create a party atmosphere around him to further his cult, but also makes use of new technologies of speakers and amplifiers and microphones to deliver messages to large audiences. And he has two major slogans: believe, obey, fight, and then Mussolini is always right. So again, within that, you see that cult of leadership, the personality cult. You also see the militarism and the absolute subjugation of the individual to the needs of the state. Mussolini also draws on a romanticized interest of the Roman past and tries to connect himself to leaders of the past such as Caesar, and he does that by massive building projects in the city of Rome that connect famous Roman landmarks to famous landmarks to him. So you have that kind of idea going on with Mussolini. In Germany, we have something similar happening with Adolf Hitler. And we'll look at how he rises to power. And he starts his Nazi party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, in Munich, also in 1919. And Nazi ideology is fascist, but it's a significantly more racist version of fascism than any others. It's founded on racial ideology. So it's nationalistic, it's pro-German, it's very racist, it's anti-democratic, and it's very militaristic. And the reason why it is so racist is that Hitler has a view of history as being a racial struggle between the Jews and kind of the Aryans or everybody else. And so he views the Jews as the primary enemy in this history of warfare between the races. It's like Marx's idea of history of war between parties, but or between classes, but Hitler uses a racial ideology. And Hitler also views communism as being kind of a morphing of Jewishness. And so he views communism and Judaism as kind of two parts of the same evil, and them working in tandem to try to crush and ruin Western society and Aryanism. So in that sense, Nazism is very much founded on a racial ideology, whereas if Hitler or Mussolini's ideology in Italy is not nearly as racist. At first, Nazism appeals to people who have been kind of shut out by the Weimar Republic, who don't have power and don't really have a chance of getting it. Ex-soldiers who were being harassed for having lost World War I, shopkeepers who go out of business because of the collapse of the German economy, and lower-class workers who just felt like they could never get a leg up because the German economy was so weak. It offered a simple explanation of history and someone to blame for the problems that you were experiencing. Hitler really couched that idea that the Germans wouldn't be having these problems if it weren't for the Jewish people. And so the people could blame then the Jews rather than looking at larger social issues to try to dissect like why there were really problems. And this initially really grabbed people's attention, and people really were drawn to it. And so we see that by 1923, party membership had grown to 55,000 people, which is a significant number. And so in 23, Hitler leads something called the Beer Hall Putsch, which is an attempt to overthrow the government of Munich that starts in a beer hall. It fails and he is thrown in jail. But while he was in jail, he writes Mein Kampf, which is kind of his explanation of history, and it brings national attention to him because everyone's asking. It shows up in newspaper of this failed coup, this failed overthrow attempt, and everyone's thinking, did you hear about this guy in Munich? And so his ideas become more spread out and become more kind of published, and that's helped by him writing speeches and giving his own individual defense at his trial. So after he is released from jail, Hitler kind of focuses on making Nazism a legitimate political party instead of a rebel group. And so his goal is to infiltrate all German society on every level with Nazi ideology. So he forms universities, creates new Nazi universities, professional groups and networking groups, even labor unions and agrarian organizations where like-minded individuals could get together, share ideas, and help each other out. He also uses a secret police known as the SA to help terrorize his opponents. So in local elections, the SA may be called in to sway the people to vote perhaps a different way than they were thinking about voting. And so this is the growth of Nazism. And despite all these efforts, the Nazi Party remains relatively small, but they do earn like 2.5% of the vote in 1928, which isn't anything to scoff at, and it gives them, the way the German system worked is you get proportional representation, so they had like 2.5% of the representatives in the Reichstag and Parliament. So that's how that works. The Great Depression hits Germany shortly thereafter, and this gives Nazis their chance because the Depression collapses the Weimar Republic, and no one is able to bring the country together. Everyone's disagreeing. There's all sorts of different opinions on what should be done to fix the problems. And here's Hitler offering, hey, here's a simple explanation for why things are terrible. It's the Jewish people's fault. And so these Nazis quickly step into the power vacuum and they gain a lot of support. And by 1932, they are the largest party in Germany with 37% of the German vote. That's a significant jump in only 4 years, and that's because they're offering these promises of change and blame. It's easy to blame someone else. Hitler is able to quickly grab power because of the fear, turmoil, angst, and general anxiety that's being experienced throughout Germany. Everyone in Germany is afraid of communism because of this revolution that had sprung up in Russia and because of the revolution that almost sprung up in Germany quickly following World War I. So Hitler uses that to his advantage, and the president of Germany offers the position of chancellor to Adolf Hitler. And Hitler takes it. The president offered it to him because he thought that Hitler was weak and could be easily manipulated, and it would be easy to control these Nazi kind of rogue party because they were not very intelligent. The president was wrong, and Hitler was quickly able to manipulate him, and within 6 months of being named chancellor, Hitler had established, in essence, a Nazi dictatorship. And so he did this in part by preying on the fears of people towards communism. And so he orders the seizure of all Communist Party buildings and any printing presses that are printing communist propaganda or communist newspapers. And then a fire burns the German parliament building, the Reichstag, and Hitler blamed the communists for this. He said that they lit the fire because they were fed up with the German system, and they were trying to start this revolution. And because of this, Hitler was then able to imprison the Communist Party members, outlaw the party system, and arrest people without a trial. And this allows him to arrest more than 25,000 political opponents. And it should be noted that he doesn't just arrest communists at this point. He's arresting anyone who opposes him, the leaders of other political parties. So Hitler's able to manipulate the fear of communism, use this fire that started at the Reichstag under very suspicious circumstances, and it's almost 100% certain that the Nazis started this fire, to blame the communists, have them outlawed as a political party, and have their leadership arrested. And preying on this fear, Hitler is able to get something passed known as the Enabling Act, which allowed him to suspend the Constitution and create laws without the consent of Parliament. It gives him absolute and total power over the German political system. And so he is then basically has free will to do whatever he wants. So Nazi Germany becomes this massive bureaucracy, which is, the idea behind it is you kind of designate so many different responsibilities that no one person can gain too much power. And by doing that, Hitler keeps himself in power, because you may have the leader of the SA, but you also have the leader of the SS, and you have the leader of the army and the Wehrmacht, and you have all sorts of different leaders, so no one's able to gain too much support besides Hitler. Hitler realizes that he's going to need to stimulate the economy because unemployment was at 44%, so he invests heavily in public works and also, in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles, in rearming the German military and building up the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army again. So he sees a drop in unemployment from 44% all the way down to 1%, and that's a huge change. So the Nazi German economic policy is successful because he sees the rise of wages, but you see the disappearance of any rights of workers, and because so much emphasis is being placed on rearmament, you have food shortages, and you don't have as many consumer goods. Everyone's so busy building tanks and guns that you don't have as many radios or cars or items that people might want. So that's a problem. The other way that Hitler is able to convince people to be loyal to him is that he subsidizes vacations and concerts for workers and party members. So if you're a loyal party member, if you're a loyal worker, you can go take a vacation to the seaside town, and the party will cover 50% of the cost. You just pay the other 50%. And he'll throw concerts for free so that everyone can enjoy it. And this gets people to have buy-in. It creates a cult of personality because everyone can thank Hitler for giving them that vacation. In the midst of this, he begins his long list of atrocities. And so he ignores the stipulations from the Treaty of Versailles. He refuses to pay reparations. He simply stops paying them back. And no one can really do anything because what are you going to do? No one wants to fight another war, especially because Hitler's also rebuilding the German military. He uses his two different branches of secret police, the SA and the SS, to terrorize what he dubs enemies of the states. And following that Reichstag fire and his Enabling Act, quickly over half of the German Communist parties is thrown in jail. And that's not just the leadership, that's half of the total members of the German Communist Party. So people very quickly try to distance themselves from that. Hitler also begins in 1933 the forced sterilization of unwanted groups, specifically the handicapped, mixed-race children, and gypsies. Those are his first target, right? The Roma is the proper term for gypsies. But those are his first targets, and he forces sterilization with the idea of ending their genetic lineage. And this is such a vast program that within 6 years, 370,000 men and women had been sterilized. That's 60,000 people a year through forced sterilization. And I'll point out that Hitler is not the only one who's doing this. That's kind of happening throughout the world. But his program is on a much larger level, and it involves racial ideology with the Roma and mixed race beyond just the handicapped. And then he turns his attentions towards the Jews. And this eventually leads to, of course, the Holocaust and the attempt to exterminate all of Europe's Jewish population. But this starts really in 1933. I mean, Nazi ideology all along has been anti-Jewish. But in 1933, the Jewish people are dismissed from civil service. They are no longer allowed to work for the government. And that's a problem. And you remember that one of the most famous Germans from World War I, Walter Rathenau, who created the War Raw Materials Board, he was a German Jew. And so he would not be allowed to have served in this government. And so they lost a lot of their best and brightest when they did this. Hitler also restricts the number of Jewish students allowed at various high schools and colleges. Eventually, he does not allow them there. And eventually, he makes it illegal for Jews to teach at these colleges. There's a series of laws that is passed. This is a step-by-step thing. People see this coming down the pipeline, but no one takes action. All the organizations within Germany, including youth clubs, labor unions, teachers unions, go through what's known as Nazification, which means eliminating any Jewish people from participating in their club or organization. 2 years later, in 1935, the Nuremberg laws are passed, which denies German Jewish people their citizenship and makes it illegal for a non-Jewish person to marry a Jewish person, or even for them to have sexual relations. So he has stripped away all rights of the German Jews. And then one of the culminating events pre-Holocaust is what's known as Kristallnacht, which is the Night of Broken Glass. In response to the assassination of a German diplomat by a Polish Jew, there is a state-organized and coordinated attacks against Jewish people, Jewish businesses, and synagogues, resulting in total destruction of those places, shattered glass. It means the Night of the Broken Glass. And following this is when the German Jews were forced to begin wearing the Star of David on their clothes. All of this a prelude to the actions during the war, where Hitler is responsible for the death of over 6 million Jewish people in Europe.